This decision to impose export bans, the pros and the cons for Tanzania?
Yeah, as always, there's two sides to the coin there. I think on the pro side, for Tanzanians, the man in the street, you obviously always link this to something else. It's not purely stopping exports, but there's also tariffs to protect local producers, and this creates jobs. So this is why they don't want them exporting, because otherwise there's a shortage because there's tariffs on imports. So why do you have tariffs? You have tariffs to protect the local industry, which creates jobs. So I think the pro is that it creates jobs. The con is that means that sugar's more expensive. The bottom line is, when you are protecting an industry, it's going to cost more, and that has inflationary impact on the man in the street.
That protectionism is not peculiar to Tanzania, though. Sugar seems to be a very sensitive issue in East Africa as a whole, because whilst Tanzania imposes these bans, we're getting word from the East African community that tax waivers must be removed in countries like Uganda and Rwanda. So there's a lot happening in the sugar sector in general.
Yes, to put it in context in the region, you're seeing a lot of tariffs, and they're not uniform. So different countries have different levels in tariffs, which I translate back to the level of competitiveness of their sugar producing industries in those countries. And now you're getting various governments as well as NGOs coming out and saying you need to be uniform and you need to start phasing out these tariffs. Whether that's the solution, I'm not entirely sure. I would favour something around a trade bloc. So a community such as COMESA, the East African trade grouping, to come together and say, let's take away tariffs in our region. So say it's the 5 countries in East Africa, they will still have tariffs for sugar from outside of that region, but scrap tariffs for the movement of sugar within those regions. And the reason you do that is all these countries on their own aren't particularly large investment. There's not a lot of international investment appetite for one or the other. But if you can combine them and say, well, I can invest in the sugar sector, for example, and I know that I've got a market that encompasses X million people with a GDP of Y, which is a lot larger than any of the individual countries, then you're moving towards something which I think is equitable for all of the countries in the region.
Talking about those trade protocols then, let's continue on that tack, because when Tanzania imposes export bans, what does it mean for the rest of the region? Because Tanzania is mainly an exporter to some of these countries within the East African community who really relied on Tanzania to provide them with sugar.
Yes, although they're at the same time also protecting their own sugar industries within these countries. So they also have tariffs on sugar imports to these countries. So I really think the solution is not so much banning exports to countries in the region or even further afield. It's rather to look at a sort of, I would call it a uniform tariff scheme.
Right. Sugar prices set to rise. We've seen them rise 39% in Kenya. How severe and dire has the situation been in Tanzania?
Very similar. That's why they put the ban on now and allowed to import. So they've dropped the tariffs to say, bring sugar in, you can import sugar now and don't export any, because they're seeing this rise. There's been a general drought in the region, so you've seen Kenya prices run up and Tanzanian prices run up a fair amount as well. So I think they're starting to let imports come in now to prevent this inflationary effect of rising prices.
What does it mean for the ordinary man on the street? Because as you're saying, inflation pressures have been severe in some of these East African countries, double-digit inflation, and that's been compounded by weaker currency. So even if we're talking about making it easier to import, it's still very expensive because those currencies are generally weak.
This is true, and one of the reasons for depreciating currency is a trade balance where it's unequal. So, and that results in your currency weakening, which has an inflationary effect. So you could say a lot of it is imported inflation, and if you stop exports, of course, you have an even larger trade imbalance. So that's quite a big factor.
Sugar as a strategic sector, you were saying that it's a job creator in Tanzania, but generally for the economy at large, how important is it? Because as we talk about removal of tariffs, Tanzania has also argued for the removal on tariffs, for instance, on its utility producers, on some of its manufacturers, because imports have become, or rather imports have become very, very expensive in Tanzania. So there's just a sense that that economy is under severe pressure in general.
It's true. The cost of imports is putting a lot of pressure on them, and this unfortunately is a vicious circle. So what they do to protect their local producers who now have very high input costs, and because of a weak currency quite often, they increase the tariffs, which results in higher costs for the men on the street.
Okay, so Tanzania and how it compares to other East African countries. You were saying that for foreign direct investors, they wouldn't look at a country specifically, they'd rather look at the bloc. So when Tanzania's got some of these issues that are pervasive within that economy, how attractive is it right now?
It's a very good point. So I think it makes it more attractive when you can invest in one, knowing that you can distribute in the region, but you're going to choose the country that has the best, let's call it, for want of a better term, legislation around an ease of doing business. So they'll be looking at that. At the moment, though, I don't think that Tanzania is at a great disadvantage to its peers, but that's what's very important in a trade bloc, is that you have some consistency in how you regulate business in general.